Hello, and thank you for watching CVI Considerations and Assessments. My name is Marguerite Tabato. I am the Assistant Director of CVI Assessment and Intervention here at Perkins, and I'll be presenting alongside my colleague, Ellen Maisel, who is the Director of Research and Development. So today we're going to talk just a little bit about essential assessments. What are these and why are they important? So some essential assessments within the field of visual impairments are conducted by teachers of the visually impaired, referred to as TVIs. So there are very specific essential assessments that students who are blind or visually impaired receive. They are required by law, and it's also important to use multiple assessment tools to look at the children's skills. Every child with CVI, regardless of their vision use, requires comprehensive assessments. So what is the TVI's role when it comes to these very essential assessments? For one, it's to help determine strategies and modalities for learning and communication, and the appropriate media for literacy and access to the general education curriculum. It's also the TVI's role to support the parents in understanding their child's accessibility needs across the school day and within the community. The parent is an essential partner when it comes to completing assessments of all types. Another role is to lead the child's educational team by sharing essential information from specialized assessments and to assist in the development of the Individualized Family Service Plan, IFSP, or the Individualized Education Plan, the IEP. So two assessments that we're going to talk about today include the Learning Media Assessment, the LMA, and the Functional Vision Assessment, and specifically in this case, the CVI assessment. It's always important to note that individualized assessment drives decisions. Decisions around how a child learns or what they need to learn is never determined through diagnosis. And these essential assessments occur throughout the child's education. They don't just occur once in the beginning of their educational career. It's important to continue to monitor and evaluate throughout the progression of that child's education because the way that children learn changes as well as what they need to learn changes. So in thinking about the value of diagnosis of CVI and how that really comes into play with assessment, the diagnosis of CVI, as well as all the other aspects of that child, helps inform what we assess and how we assess. That assessment process results in assessment results, which then drives learning media accommodations and methodologies. And the child's response to those accommodations and methodologies over time will then circle back and impact again how we assess and how we change our intervention methods. One essential assessment, as I mentioned earlier, is the functional vision assessment, so around CVI. So in combination with the clinically measured ocular findings, so the information that you would obtain through the eye doctor, for example, the FVA identifies the student's manifestations of visual functioning and determines how much usable vision a student has to perform visual tasks. And all of these assessments consist of interviews, observations, and direct assessments. And the goal is really to identify priorities and strategies for intervention. As mentioned earlier, it's required for all students, regardless of vision status. And legally, the report must also address whether there is a need for a clinical low vision evaluation or assessment for orientation and mobility services. When we're thinking about the general student population around those who are visually impaired, and we're thinking now specifically around CVI, children with CVI require the same exact process as those with ocular impairments. But instead, they require specific consideration for the unique implications of brain-based visual impairments. So we're still going through the same process. We're just thinking about the assessment process and outcomes a little bit differently. So when it comes to CVI, why does CVI require specialized assessment? CVI occurs due to injury to the visual pathways or the visual processing portions of the brain. And it can impact visual attention, so where to look, when to look at something, or how long to look at it. And the visual recognition, understanding what you're looking at and how you should be interacting with it. Many children with CVI also have ocular impairments that need to be considered during evaluation. An assessment needs to be carefully considering what information is coming through the eye and how it's being processed in the brain. How is that child obtaining information and how are they using it to learn and access the world around them? When we're thinking about going through these essential assessments, it's always important that we're thinking about compensatory strategies and really using them to help support that child in their learning. So what are compensatory strategies and why are they valuable? Compensatory skills refer to the use of strategies, techniques, and adaptive materials that students with visual impairments need to access educational curriculum and as a means of navigating the world as a whole. It's always considering and allowing for visual access and learning while identifying additional strengths and strategies. So for example, some compensatory strategies might include relying on their hearing, touch, smell, taste, context clues. All of this can give the student really rich and valuable information that can support learning. Using compensatory strategies does not detract from learning. At Perkins, we're looking at 16 areas of assessment. They include visual attention and visual recognition, which really captures all the ways the child is impacted by CVI. And all of these areas are impacted by form accessibility, visual curiosity, appearance of the eyes, movement of the eyes, visual fields, response interval, visual guidance of upper limbs, visual guidance of lower limbs, impact of motion, sensory integration and the impact on vision, impact of clutter, impact of color, impact of light, and access to people. So these are very specific visual behaviors that are captured within these assessment areas. And we're looking at how the child's CVI impacts them in these particular ways, and how, at a more broad level, how do these different factors impact visual attention and visual recognition. And then we're also looking again at the compensatory strategies and skills. Across all these different areas, what strategies is the child using in order to gain information, and how can we capitalize on that? And for more information on these assessment areas, you can visit cvinow.org. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ellen Maisel to talk more about the learning media assessment.
Thanks, Marguerite. We also think about the learning media assessment when we're doing essential assessments for children with CVI. Some important areas of focus are certainly the sensory channel use. It's very important for us to not only think about children's vision, but to think about the whole child and how they're using those compensatory skills when they're fatigued, how they're using those compensatory skills when they are trying to confirm their visual recognition. So really, really important. We also know that the learning media assessment is essential for what kind of media accessibility is there so that we can create the right kind of literacy materials for children. Also considering the learning access of the environment and the identification of learning tools. Learning media assessment is not as much of a tool as it is a process, and it's really comprised of using several different instruments over several sessions, observation over time, and input from various team members. Learning media assessment occurs every 3 years or in response to any change in function, but honestly, the process is ongoing. It's happening all the time. Anytime you interact with a child, I think you're gathering this kind of information about how they're using their vision and how they're using compensatory skills. There has to be a consistent consideration and awareness of the changing visual demands, not only of the coursework and the materials, but the community engagement. What does vision look like in an unfamiliar environment? What does it look like when that environment has increased sound or increased motion? So it's for the community and beyond, for the parents. We know that IDEA, or the Individuals with Disability Education Act, really tells us that there must be a provision for Braille instruction for students with visual impairments. It says the IEP team shall, in the case of a child who is blind or visually impaired, provide instruction in Braille and the use of Braille unless the IEP team determines, after an evaluation, the child's reading and writing skills need what they need, an appropriate reading and writing media, including in the evaluation the children's future needs for instruction in Braille and in the use of Braille. That instruction in Braille or the use of Braille is not important for a child, has to be determined through an assessment. This provision provides that every student with a visual impairment who has an IEP, this applies to every single one of them. Some children with CVI require Braille and some do not. The need is not dependent on the diagnosis, but dependent on a child's needs. When we think about a CVI assessment, the general goals are to identify the reported visual behaviors of CVI that have implications for the child's learning, to identify the appropriate potential supports to build accessible learning environments, and to identify the potential accommodations and support that the student requires for an equal access to their education. Sometimes we don't know exactly what's going to work with a child, so systematic instruction is going to be very important here. Taking baseline data, putting a promising practice in place, and collecting data on its efficacy. Historically, many children with CVI have lacked a diagnosis or are misdiagnosed due to a wide spectrum of the way that CVI manifests itself. Our new Perkins CVI Protocol, an educational roadmap for the whole child, is really a new tool in the sense that it's rooted in current research and it's being developed in an effort to identify more children with CVI despite how CVI impacts them. We don't want to miss any children. We don't want to miss any children's visual behaviors. It's constructed to support the whole child approach with careful consideration of each individual child and provide each child with a high quality assessment with individual recommendations. It's going to be a digital platform which supports these goals by being available to every TVI regardless of where they live and regardless of their education around the topic of CVI. So they're going to be doing the assessment and learning about CVI at the same time with these embedded learning opportunities to support visual skills, an assessment of not only visual skills but compensatory skills, and having the ability to add research into the protocol or support what's in the protocol with the most current research is going to be very, very important with this digital platform. CVI protocol will have many components. It will start off with a student portrait, which the parent will fill out. That's going to contain wonderful information about not only what your child can do, but what they struggle with. It's going to allow us to know what their most reliable responses are. Can they tell us what they see? Do they point to what they see? Do they smile when they see something that they like? All of these very important ideas to allow us to know what the child is understanding. It's also going to allow us to tailor the assessment to that child. So if they like Harry Potter, then Harry Potter will be the basis of some of the assessment components. A very comprehensive file review is conducted, not only of the medical, but also the educational files. So take a look at ophthalmology reports, low vision reports, neurological reports, speech and language, PTOT, the related service providers, and the educational reports. That's going to give us a lot of information because even though some teams might not understand the implications of CVI, they understand what their children are struggling with. So we see very common language in those IEPs or in those reports that give us a great deal of information about the impact of that child's CVI. We also have observation protocols, which helps the TVI understand, now that you know this information from the student portrait and the parent interview, where and what are you wanting to observe when you're observing the child. We also have direct assessment protocols. What needs further evaluation? What needs further teasing out? And what tools will be helpful for teasing that out? This will all culminate in a report that's generated, not only with a summary of all these components that we've learned so far, but also the recommendations for what that child might need, not only for materials, but for the environment. And we'll give some ideas of procedures to support this ongoing systematic instruction. We know that any assessment of a child is a moment in time, and that we need to continue evaluation with baseline data, correct goals and objectives, and data on the progress in those goals and objectives. Here's just a little flow chart of how the CVI protocol will look. It's going to begin, as we said, with the file and records review, and the parent is going to get the student portrait emailed or mailed to them so that they can fill that out for the TVI. By filling that out, that might eliminate some of the questions that are being asked in the parent interview. For instance, if you are telling us that the child uses a wheelchair with full adult assistance, then any of the questions in the parent interview that involve self-exploration would be automatically removed. The parent interview and the student portrait and the file review will culminate in a student sketch, the beginnings of what we currently know about this child around the 16 different visual behaviors that Perkins has created as umbrellas for what is currently understood to be difficulties for children with CVI. That will also generate a doctor's letter. Once the teacher of students with visual impairments has all this information, they'll get the observation protocols and the direct assessment protocols to know where and when to do those evaluations, what time of day, what environments. And all of this information culminates in the final report with recommendations. Again, the need for ongoing assessment cannot be stressed enough. We know that this educational assessment is just a moment in time. It's a jumping off point for understanding accommodations and teaching methodologies. We know that each child with CVI is unique not only in the way their CVI manifests, but what will help them is also unique to them. So it's essential for us to understand their supports and create a way for team members to monitor the progress in between evaluations. This will build a truly robust understanding of the impact of some of the interventions that we're putting in place. If they're effective, we'll maintain them and move forward. If they're ineffective, we'll use our data to adjust our practice and try something new. The team members must include parents working together to address this. I invite you to look for more information on cvinow.org, just a wonderful wealth of information and webinars about the topic of CVI, again, with the most current research available. We also have not only this website, we have a parent Facebook group, which is closed and available only to parents. You can join that right through CVI Now if you are a parent. And all of these tools will really help you understand CVI in a more deep way and perhaps how it impacts your child. It's going to discuss some of these essential assessments that must be completed in order to get a full picture of your child. The CVI protocol, the information about the protocol is also on CVI Now. And on CVI Now, you have a wonderful IEP guide and so much more. So I really invite you to check that out. I hope you enjoyed every part of the Early Connections Conference and wish you well.